It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we're going to take a look at new filings in the Johnson versus Zuffa case. We're going to look at the revocation of a Biden executive order on competition. We're going to take a look at the revenue share that was presented by the MMAFA at the ABC convention a little over a week ago, because the graphic gives some details that we want to discuss with you guys. We're going to talk about Conor McGregor and John Jones and Michael Venom Page and even Don King. But if you want access to all of this stuff, you are going to have to subscribe, and with your dollars and cents, because some of this will be behind a paywall. But if you're looking for free content, we did put up some really good stuff from the MMAFA yesterday. Now, they presented a slideshow, and there's video of Nate Quarry and Cajun Johnson as they presented at the ABC convention, and the MMAFA was kind enough to give us all that content so that we could share it with all of you guys. And it is on the house. So make sure you check all of that out, and make sure that you're checking out all of our content. John, how the heck are you?
Oh. When people say the word elder abuse, usually you think it's about some young guy beating up an old person. But my mom is just beating the crap out of me here. So I am going to try to get to the show. And I'm also had to make a run to the store to get her candy late at night. And then I made the mistake. I tried not to eat candy. I ate some of her peanut M&Ms, and now I'm choking on the goddamn bastard. So let's see if I can get through this show without dying.
Okay, well, we will go ahead and jump right in. New filings from the Johnson versus Zuffa case just came out. What are they?
Well, there are a couple new filings, more than a few, I should say. I think there was 6 total. But the most important ones was the defendants, that Zuffa, the UFC, also AKA TKO Operating Company, Endeavor Group Holdings is one of the defendants now being roped in. They filed an opposition to the plaintiff's motion for sanctions. If you remember, we talked about this previously, that the plaintiffs have asked for sanctions against the UFC, the defendant, for not going along with discovery, and they're not disclosing all the information they're supposed to, at least according to the plaintiffs. That's one thing they filed. They have a hearing request with the judge to basically say that the plaintiff's motion is just kind of groundless, and that they are complying as best as they can, and just that of that nature. The other one that people will probably find interesting is that there was a motion filed by a non-party, in other words, not a plaintiff or defendant, and that's Dominance MMA, which is basically Ali Abdelaziz, his company that manages fighters. And they filed an opposition to the plaintiff's motion to compel, claiming that the request is too broad, and that they're requesting stuff that has nothing to do with the case, and that they shouldn't have to be compelled to hand over that disclosure. Amusing enough, today there was a separate filing by Dominance to update the previous one, because they mistakenly, in one sentence, read, I believe, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it right in front of me, but they wrote, we do have access to all of our clients' material, or we do have the right to access to all of our clients' material. And they meant to write, and then they wrote an update that this is supposed to say, we do not have access, or we are not meant to have access to all of our clients' materials. So a little snafu there in the original filing by Dominance MMA. So that's the big filings we have going on there. August 26th, in 2 weeks, there's going to be a hearing in Vegas. The judge is going to look at this, and we will get a determination who is telling the truth and who is full of shit soon enough.
Ooh, can't wait for that. Now, Trump revoked a Biden executive order on competition. Can you explain what that order did and why it's so important?
Well, obviously, we don't want competition in this country. So that is very good that he revoked it, because who wants more competition? What it is just the other day, August 13th, I believe it was, President Trump revoked an executive order that Biden put in 2021. It's the one that was written by Tim Wu. Basically, it was an order, I think it was Executive Order 14036, I believe it was. Very important order, actually, because what it was is the Biden administration put an order that all throughout the executive branch, he wants all the heads of each of the departments, each agency, to be looking at ways to promote competition in the American economy. It was aimed to address what the administration described as corporate abuses, and some of the stuff they went after was like excess airline fees and mergers that increased consumer costs. So this revocation is being celebrated by the Trump administration and his various department heads, and also Chamber of Commerce. That should kind of tell you who this is helping, and they claim it's going to recalibrate and modernize the economy. Another person celebrating this is Joshua Wright on the internet. And if people don't know Joshua Wright, he is how do I put this kindly? He's nice enough on Twitter to me, but there's a lot of allegations of being a sex pest, let's put it that way, against him, sexual harassment from him, potential sexual abuse. And that also he is basically a paid shill by a lot of monopolies. He collects millions of dollars per year writing reports on behalf of Google and other massive companies that always seem to find a way that say they're doing the right thing and they're not abusing power. So that's the type of people celebrating this. It'll have a lot of impact because it's going to change the direction that the government has been going, a lot of the agencies, and also will affect us consumers. People might not, be right, but remember a few years ago where they were going after the airlines and they stopped those hidden charges against you.
Yes.
They had to list everything in advance. They couldn't sneak in charges. They couldn't charge for everything. Now, since Trump came into office, you'll see those charges are coming back. They're sneaking back in hidden charges. There was bank overdraft charges were limited under the Biden administration. Now they're being changed. And that has, some of them are not directly because of this executive order, but they become because of it, because he told all the agencies to look for ways to protect consumers from the abuse by powerful companies and to increase competition. And so that's what we're having. Now, the one that we're waiting for, a lot of talk that this might be impacted too. There was FTC Lina Khan, you remember, issued an order on non-competes. There's a lot of talk that the Trump administration, someone, either him or the FTC, will rescind that order. I shouldn't say it wasn't rescinded by her when she left, but they kind of put a freeze on it and didn't support it. But now there is talk that they're going to completely counter that order that's been frozen by the courts about the non-competes, which was one of the best things that Lina Khan had done. It hadn't gone into effect yet, but the impact could have potentially been huge for a lot of workers. And now it looks like that might be just completely eliminated.
Does any of that affect the antitrust cases?
Well, not directly, and it actually really very little, because the antitrust case is in a parallel track. It's there's the executive branch and the judicial branch. The antitrust case exists in the judicial branch. Where it could impact it is, remember we talked to Rob Macy, and I brought up the idea of the DOJ or the FTC under Biden going after Zuffa if the case had been settled for the time and that Biden or Kamala Harris had won and they retained the Biden administration, DOJ or FTC. And that's where you see an impact, is that people appointed by Trump would never go after them anyways. But even if they wanted to, if they even had the urge to start investigating these orders, I'm guessing that they've made it clear they do not want to be going after companies as much, and because you see what they're happening in other departments, they're going after specific companies that are being targeted by the Trump administration because they've displeased them. And it's a weird thing to see, is that they're enforcing antitrust, but only against specific targets that the administration doesn't seem to like and doesn't seem to reward the administration. So the way it would impact the lawsuit would be only by the fact that the other departments there's very little to no chance now at all, even though there was not a not a guaranteed chance, but I thought it was likely that they would have got involved with the UFC eventually. But there's little to no chance now that other departments in the executive branch will ever look into the UFC.
A few hours after Mark Shapiro said that pay-per-view is a thing of the past, Dana White told the New York Post that pay-per-view is not dead. Who are we to believe here, and why is there a discrepancy?
I mean, who should we believe here? I'm going to say I believe them both in some ways. I think what happened here, and this is just me trying to read between the lines, is Shapiro is selling the idea that we are going to go to Paramount and you, the fans, should get excited because we're getting rid of pay-per-view. And also it distinguishes them from any of their competitors, including competitors in boxing who are still going to be remaining on pay-per-view. And so he made this pitch to basically let everybody know this is a new day for the UFC. Be excited about this new deal. Now, in the hours that passed between when Shapiro said that and Dana White got on there, I think there's a couple possibilities. One is that they have in the agreement that for certain big fights, they can still do extra events that are not part of the deal. That's one possibility. And those events can be on pay-per-view. So like they see an event that could be sell mega pay-per-views, just a massive event, instead of lose out on the money because you're just getting your guaranteed contractual money, we can hold this separate event on a pay-per-view and make extra money in addition to what Paramount's paying us. That's one possibility. The other possibility is because fighters have pay-per-view bonuses written in their contracts, and this new deal basically kind of violates those contracts. They do not get the benefit of the bargain with this negotiation that they didn't take part of, the fighters, and they lose on potential pay-per-view points. They can complain and say, my contract is no longer valid because it no longer has the pay-per-view points I was counting on before. And so I want to challenge this contract, just as we had Rob Macy on last show talking about how that's a possibility if a fighter was told to take the risk. By Dana White saying we're still doing pay-per-views, this is potentially a way to tell those fighters, you can't challenge us on this because we could still potentially do pay-per-views. And if you're going to push against us so hard, we could possibly put on a pay-per-view and to honor that agreement. But obviously you will not be happy and we will still use our contractual rights and make your life hell. I'm guessing on that part. And so you better renegotiate with us. So I think this could potentially just be a way of Dana White saying, don't use our words we said before to say your contract's voided because we changed the deal. We're going to claim we can still put on pay-per-views just so you can't make that argument to try to challenge these contracts. That's another possibility. The other possibility is they got more pay-per-views to sell this fall. And he doesn't want to badmouth them completely because he wants people still to buy the pay-per-views because he doesn't want to leave ESPN that mad at them for completely sabotaging the pay-per-view market as they leave. So I think all those are possibilities. I don't know which one is accurate. I mean, there's potentially some other reasons he said that. Maybe Dana White just really likes pay-per-views. Maybe they want to, the other possibility is Paramount, after signing the deal, maybe told Dana White and Mark Shapiro and TKO, you know what, in the future, we'll start out as a subscription base. But if we need to, we want to be able to put these events on pay-per-view to get our money back if they're not generating the subscriptions we wanted. So all those are possibilities. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but I wouldn't be shocked if any one of those is accurate.
Or a combination of them all.
Yeah, it's a possibility. It could be multiple ones, Or again, someone didn't tell Dana White and Shapiro weren't at the same meeting and neither one had a clue what was going on. I find that hard to believe, but you never know.
According to the MMA-FA, revenue share for UFC fighters last year was just 17%. Now that the UFC has basically doubled or more than doubled their expected revenue with the Paramount Plus deal, Dana White has said that fighters will receive more. What do you think that means, and how would you like to see the pay tiers structured? And when I say pay tiers for our listeners out there, I want to know what John thinks lower tier fighters should get, mid-tier fighters should get, elite fighters should get, bonuses, what have you. So John, take it away.
Well, first off the bat, if anybody knows what fighters are making, it's probably the MMAFA, Rob Basie and them, because they have access to the disclosure. I don't know how much they have right now, but they must have enough because they know what UFC fighters were paid from July 1st, 2016 until I think it was mid-August or something like 2023. I calculated before as part of the settlement, they revealed that fighters made over $1 billion during that period. And we also kind of know what the UFC revenue is within a few million per year. So we can calculate during that period from July 1st, 2016 until some period in 2023. That means the fighters were paid a little over like 16% of the revenue. So 17%, which might include the, again, some of the material that's not direct payments, like that are included as compensation, or it might just be pure fighter pay. But that sounds about right in that ballpark, 16, 17%. So I kind of trust that's accurate because it matches what we have. It matches the numbers that came up before. And from the source it's coming from, it's probably the most trustworthy source you can get on this subject. So I'm guessing that's true. Now, on to what do we expect? With the Paramount deal, it's going to pay them on average annual valuation is going to be $1.1 billion. But, not every year they're going to get that. They're going to start lower. It's going to raise. But we're going to just say, let's use that 1.1 billion as the number we're going to use. Last year, they made 1.4 billion. The average annual valuation of the ESPN deal, when you include the broadcast deal and the pay-per-view component, was about $550 million. That's the estimate we have. So they've doubled it, 550 additional million. And so you add that to the 1.4 billion they made last year. Let's just up it a little bit to make it easy because they're obviously contractually they're making more this year. So we'll say next year they're going to make $2 billion, right? $2 billion. And, at 17% of $1.4 billion, that is $238 million went to the fighters. So how much of that $550 million more are they going to give the fighters is the question. Will they give them the 17% they were paying them before, or will they give them more or give them less? That's the big question. So what do I think will happen? Well, Dana White said the low-hanging fruit is the fighter bonuses, the performance of the nights. And I don't know exactly how much they're going to raise those, but let's take a guess. Let's say they raise them from $50,000 to $75,000. That's a 50% increase. Well, back in 2013, that's when they introduced that $50,000 bonus for all events. Remember before it was one event for a pay-per-view would be $75,000, and then for a fight night it'd be like $25,000.
Yeah.
And so fighters were always jockeying who could get on the pay-per-views. They wanted to stop that, so they said every event, every bonus now will be $50,000. Well, if we adjust that for inflation, it's about $70,000. So from 2013 to now, so if they go $75,000, they've increased it just above inflation. So they're basically at where inflation would have brought the number to this point. That would also, as Dana White said, this would add, if we increase when we increase the bonuses, that'll bring in millions for the fighters. Well, adding $25,000 per bonus from $50,000 to $75,000, there's 4 bonuses paid out usually per event. That's $100,000, right? There are 43 events per year. That's 4.3 additional million paid to the fighters. That's millions of dollars. So I'm kind of guessing, I could be wrong. Maybe they're going to give $100,000 bonuses. Maybe they're going to increase more bonuses. But I'm kind of guessing that that's what they're going to do with the bonuses. And so they will see that's 4.3 million, which, I'm sure fighters will be happy, but that does not seem like enough compared to how much more the UFC is getting. So what else can they do? I'm also guessing they look at that minimum. The minimum was made in 2015 is when they set the minimum to 10,000 and 10,000. Now, briefly, they've gone up to 12 and 12, but really the minimum, because so many fighters coming from the contenders comes in at 10 and 10. 10 and 10 is still the same minimum now 10 years later. Just on inflation, if they increase the minimum to 14,000 and 14,000, that would match how much inflation. We've had about 40% inflation since 2015. That would get us to 14 and 14. So you would match inflation. You would adjust that number for inflation if you did that. The good thing about 14 and 14 too is in 2015 they wrote a report. That report written up, I should say, for the UFC. What would happen to the overall pay if we changed the minimum? It was at 8 and 8 at the time, right before they changed it. And they had a listing of what would 10 and 10 do to the company, what would 12 and 12, and what would 14 and 14 do. Well, with 14 and 14, because there are multiple tiers the way the UFC works, you have your first contract, and then it bumps up into your second contract. So your first is 14 and 14. You win, it's 16 and 16. You win, it's 18 and 18. Your second contract for 4 fights starts, I believe, at that point, 24 and 24, I believe, jumps up to 27 and 27, et cetera, et cetera. Then at the third contract would be like somewhere around 35,000 it would start out. And then there's the final 4th contract. And when you get above that, it gets to these kind of more unique categories for the UFC. But when you change the minimum, the other tiers change as well because they need gaps between those tiers. And so it increases everybody's contract when they renegotiate a new one. And so making the minimum 14 and 14 would increase the overall payroll about $9 million if they did that. So I'm guessing they'll do something like that too. They'll increase the minimum to 14 and 14. And that's so you have the 4.3 million for the bonuses increase and the $9 million for the minimum increase. Now you've increased by $13 million per year paid to the fighters. I still don't think that'll be enough to keep people happy. And so there's a last group I think they will focus on. They are the fighters that currently have pay-per-view points. And those pay-per-view points no longer stand, even though most fighters that have pay-per-view points and collect them do not get bonuses because the pay-per-view sales have been so low. There are several of them that probably, that can still sell pay-per-views, make some money on it. And there's other fighters hoping that they'll get in a big fight and the pay-per-view points will actually pay off at that time. But those fighters have to be renegotiated, give them new contracts. Also, so that they can't claim that this contract was changed on them. They didn't get the benefit of the bargain, and so they can challenge the contracts, as Rob Macy talked about. So they'll renegotiate with them. Now, this group is probably the top 20 fighters, basically. The top 20 fighters traditionally have made about anywhere from 40% to 50% of the total roster's revenue. That they're the ones that get paid the most. And so I don't see that changing. So I could see them coming back and say, we are going to offer you guys pay bumps, several $1 million each in your next agreement for each fight. We will keep you where you guys get 50% of the revenue. Maybe this will be a sizable increase for these fighters. Maybe we'll say, we are going to increase your pay by $50 million, you top 20 to 40 fighters. Let's say it's just the top 20. So $50 million total. So each one of you on average will get an extra $2.5 million per year, some more, some less, but it'll be a big bump up. Well, if that's the case, right, or it might be higher than maybe 60 million. They could do that as well. So 60 million, let's say it is. And then you add in the 10 million, the 13 million from the other sources. That's 73 additional million for the fighters we could pay out. This is just kind of my assumption what's going to happen. So that's a 1/3 increase to fighter pay in 1 year. And that's a sizable increase. The thing is, though, if we use that number I said, where we went from 1.4 billion to 2 billion, the UFC EBITDA is going to go from, and we take 75 million for the fighters, the UFC EBITDA is going to go from 800 million to 1.275 billion in EBITDA, over 60% revenue margins now. So the UFC is going to see a tremendous amount of profit because the only cost for the extra money they're making on the Paramount deal is the fighter costs. The production, the marketing, administration, that is already covered. That does not increase. Those fees are set. They do not increase just because you have a higher pay-per-view television deal. The only expense is what you decide, the UFC decides, because it's not contractual, what you decide to give the fighters. So let's say, again, let's pretend they give them 75 million. The UFC is going to get 475 million additional money net, basically profit from this deal. The fighters' pay will go up 1/3, like I said, but a 1/3 increase of pay does something interesting. As we talked about, if 17% of the revenue is going to the fighters at 1.4 billion, that's 238 million. We add 75 million to that, that's 213 million. That is 5 and we say revenue goes up to 2 billion, that revenue split, even though it's now gone up 75 million, it goes from 17% of the revenue to 15.5% of the revenue now. So even so, they had a sizable increase in the wage level across the board for the fighters, and a lot of them will probably be excited about that. We've now seen the revenue share decreased and the UFC's profit margins not increased by the same incremental level, but drastically increased. So that's my guess what's going to happen. Now, you want to know what I think should happen. I think that was the second part of your question. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is pretty simple because I don't think there's any point in trying to break it down by what pay tier each fighter should get, right? I don't think there's a point in me saying, well, this should be the minimum. This is what the middle should make. I think the simplest thing that should happen, really simple, is that as part of this agreement, the UFC should say all contracts in the UFC now are only 1 year in length. That's the maximum amount of time. Or just do what the Phil Davis suit argues for. We will give you an option after 1 year that you can option out of your contract. So fighters have the option after 1 year of exiting the contract. That's what I think is the only change we need. So instead of trying to determine exactly which fighter makes what and how, well, if we did that, then there'd be some sort of market force that could determine what fighters actually deserve to make. And I think it makes sense to have a 1 year contract because, as we talked a lot about TKO's bill that they're trying to push, the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act and UBOs. Well, in boxing, the conduct in that bill, the conduct that the UFC does, is a violation of the Ali Act. It's though they use coercive contracts. The UBO makes it clear to fight in the UBO, you have to be signed to the UBO. Well, in the Ali Act, it says if you are requiring a boxer sign with you in order to get a fight, if that's a requirement, which is the definition of the UBO, because you cannot fight anybody in the UBO unless you sign with us, well, that's a coercive contract. And the rule of a coercive contract, according to the Ali Act, is that those contracts cannot be over 1 year in length. So why don't we just apply that to the UFC now? Because they're engaging in the same practices, and not to be unfair just to the UFC, like I'm targeting them. If PFL wants to do the same thing with titles, and restrict and UBO type behavior where you have to be an exclusive contract, you have to sign with them to fight anybody in their organization. Well, why shouldn't their contracts only be 1 year in length? These promotions, when they operate this way, they're not really building up fighters. There's no need to have exclusive contracts long term because the fighters are basically serving the function of content. Let's just make those contracts 1 year. Within a short amount of time, we will see where the market dictates how much each fighter deserves to get paid. And I think that would be my simple solution without having to try to determine what each fighter deserves.
Many still believe that a union is what will save fighters. Why do you disagree with this?
Well, this is another one. And I got in a few little minor arguments on Twitter about this. And I know it's very popular. And I saw a lot of people want to blame the fighters for the problem that, if they just organized, if they just got together and they organized, they would have got a piece of this deal. And I'm here to tell people that's not how it would work. They would not get a big chunk. They wouldn't get 50% of this agreement. The first thing you got to remember is that it's really hard to unionize in the United States. Over half, I think it's 60% right now, the current survey, 60% of all U.S. workers say they want to be represented by a union. And yet, in the private sector, less than 6% are represented by a union. And most of those are represented by unions that were founded decades ago. So right there should tell you something, that so many people want to form a union, cannot. It's very difficult to form a union. We have made it very hard. On top of that, it's much, much harder for UFC fighters to form a union. One is those other workers are employees. The UFC fighters are not employees. They are classified as independent contractors. And such, they do not get the protections of the National Labor Relations Act. And so they're up for reprisals from the UFC if they tried to unionize. In addition, they do not work at a workplace. There's not a site that they all meet. They're not members of a team.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!